Welcome to the new For Purpose CEO podcast.
I'm Michelle.
I am Danielle, and we are here to talk about being a CEO in the for-purpose sector. Each episode, we will talk about issues not-for-profit and for-purpose CEOs need to manage based on our 30-plus years of experience. It will be an honest discussion of the highs and the lows, helping you tackle the unique challenges of running a NFP.
Leading can be challenging and sometimes lonely. We get it. Join us and our guests weekly for an honest discussion about running a for-purpose organisation. We will be sharing practical tips, shared experiences and real-world stories to help you tackle the unique challenges of running a for-purpose organisation.
So today we wanted to talk about stakeholders. For-purpose and not-for-profit organisations have multiple ranges of stakeholders. And we thought, given that we have very different experiences, that this would actually be a great topic for us to sort of jump into. So types of stakeholders that you've got experience working with, Michelle?
Yeah, so I think it's really important when you're talking about your stakeholders to actually list them and work out who you've got around you, who you're working with. So most not-for-profits or most for-purpose organisations are going to have some form of beneficiary or client, funders. But I've spent a number of years in membership organisations, and so members are, I think, a really interesting group of stakeholders. I mean, the whole purpose of the organisation is to work for the members, and so they're clearly the most important stakeholder that you have. But I think the point is that you work with the different stakeholders in quite different ways. And I think that's, if you are coming into an organisation new, one of the first things I think you really have to do is to list all your stakeholders and look at the existing relationships with them and what is the driving force of that relationship with that particular stakeholder. And I think from my perspective, working in membership organisations, I mean, it can be really hard and it can also be fantastic. So you end up getting really close relationships with your members and having, and I've got friends who were members still, you have ongoing, really tight, good relationships. But the whole organisation is for the members. And so it very much is about understanding their needs. And members also aren't a uniform group. So in my case, I was working in a professional association. And so you might have some new grads, you might have some students who are still studying, you might have people who have worked for 20 years in the field, and they are going to have very different views of the organisation. They're going to have very different needs of the organisation. They're at very different stages in their career. And so you can support them in very different ways. And I think it's one of the challenges to understand not just the list of the stakeholders that you've got, but actually to understand what each particular stakeholder is seeking from your organisation and how you support them.
I've not worked in a members-based organisation, so it's really interesting to listen to that and hear, even in your members, there are different stages or different needs. How did you actually go through and manage that or corral that so it was also aligned with the purpose of the organisation?
Well, absolutely. And I think the purpose of the organisation, and it depends on the different organisation, but it might be that there's multiple reasons for your existence. So it might be first and foremost to form a community, to organise, for example, a big annual conference where you can showcase developments, or you get people in from overseas who are going to show the latest developments, whether it's in the technology or the research. So there's building of that community. But it might also be a supporting role. So, for example, if you've got your students or your new grads, then really trying to support them in starting their career. So I set up like a mentoring program. We did different events for new grads. And it might also be, depending on the nature of the organisation, how you define new grads. Like new grads might be new for a year or two, or they might be up to 5 years because their particular career might change in the sense that they might start working with someone and then go out on their own. So they're actually going to have quite distinct career stages where they may need different support. And I think you can't underestimate the importance of building a community, like delivering a community, having particular learning, education, or just social events for the different groups. But also, I think in terms of the mentoring program, what was so amazing to me was that both the mentees and the mentors all came back and said, I got so much out of it, because the mentors, the older, so say you've been working for 20 years in the area and then you suddenly have one-on-ones with over a period of a year with someone who's just 2 years out or 3 years out, you are going to hear a completely different version of that stage of the career to what you had. And also then, you've developed a trusted space for the more junior member to ask, some business development or, setting up questions or just things that people don't like to talk about. How much does it cost to set up on your own? Like things like this, which people don't really want to talk publicly about, but they're actually going to talk about in a one-on-one setting. Yeah. So as a membership organisation, then you will be providing that, but also things like advocacy, relationships with the government. Maybe there's some legislation or regulations that members like or dislike. So there's a lot of advocacy that comes into it as well. And I think that's going to change depending on the membership organisation that you have. And it may be more or less important. I mean, in my case, it was actually quite important. We had quite a lot of government work. And that's hard work too, right? Like members think that if you're going to take an issue or raise an issue with government, that they expect something to happen. And we all know that advocacy takes a long time to create change.
I was going to say, I heard at some point advocacy, it takes generally 20 years for a policy position to actually become policy in government. So it's that long, and that doesn't account for all of the advocacy that happens before that policy position is sort of agreed. So to your point, in a member-based organisation, the expectation from the members is that you're doing all the lobbying and the advocacy work. And so it will start to get traction really quickly and they'll see a change. And yet there actually could be several years down the track before it's real.
Yeah. And look, obviously sometimes a crisis will force a change. So obviously COVID got really quick, rapid changes as needed, and some of them moved on. If there's a funding crisis or if something happens in a sector, then obviously that will draw attention to it and you might be able to jump on that and create some change. But I think in terms of your managing of the members and that communication, and I think it depends on the size of the organisation, right? So if you've got 500 members versus 5,000 members, you're going to have to break down your members and communicate with them differently. It always comes back to relationships. And I think that's the thing as a new CEO, is to try, especially if you've got a member organisation, to get some really strong relationships with the different types of members so you understand their issues and what they're looking to you for. I mean, in my experience, people like talking about what they want. Like if you go to them and say, listen, I really want to listen. I really want to understand, what are your issues? What are you dealing with? What do you think other members are dealing with? And what are you expecting? People like talking about that. It's just that you've got to listen and then work out what you can actually deliver. And I think that's where the subtlety comes in as the CEO, which is you obviously can't deliver everything. And so you need to have that really open conversation about, let's understand what you need and then let's prioritise and then let's work out what we can do. The other thing about a member organisation is normally you get a high percentage of members who want to help as well, like who might be volunteers, they'll be on committees. And I think that's a huge benefit because you've got committees staffed by members who are really interested. They're interested and they want to achieve something. And I think harnessing that is really important. Like you've really got to make sure that you're leveraging the fantastic resources and know-how, right? Because if you've got, say, some government legislation or regulations, then they're the subject matter experts. Like you might be able to go and take the advocacy piece and translate it, but you need the subject matter expertise, which you may or may not have. If it's a professional member association, you might not be a whatever, dentist, architect, your lawyer, you actually need to leverage their subject matter expertise.
So I think what we're saying, listening to your experience working in members-based organisation, is that generally not-for-profit and for-purpose have many stakeholders. It's never a singular or dual stakeholder program. There's several. And many not-for-profits, there are obviously different not-for-profits or different for-purpose organisations that support different stakeholders as well, or need access or rely on different stakeholders as well. So that can be anything from funders or donors, members, as we've spoken about, employees, beneficiaries, as you've spoken about, the broader community, because the community generally has an interest or an expectation of not-for-profits or for-purpose organisations, government, regulators. Many for-purpose organisations enter into strategic partnerships as well to be able to deliver and meet a purpose as well.
Collaborating with different organisations.
That's exactly right. Or advocacy. So I often look at those things and I'm like, oh, I must feel like, sometimes I feel like this, like I have many bosses. There are many people who have a lot of expectation.
And often not pulling in the same direction, right? Like, so people will have conflicting needs, wants, desires, and might want you to do different things. And so I think that's one of the hard things, is to work out what everyone wants, what their interests are, and where they're aligned and not aligned. And I think that's okay. Like, I think it's okay to have stakeholders that want different things. It's up to you, though, to manage that and to communicate and be quite transparent about what you can do and what you can't do. But the first step is you have to get a list and plot who your stakeholders are. I think you cannot possibly start in a CEO role and not do that step.
And they're understanding who the stakeholders are by sort of name or by function. And then there are many tools that we're talking about as well, in terms of once you've got your list of your stakeholders, then there are tools that you can apply to be able to know or map out exactly their level of importance to the organisation, where you can start to map out what value that you provide or they provide to you, so that you can start to move into an action plan. And you've done some work on this as well yourself, haven't you?
Yeah, I think there's pretty standard like stakeholder maps, and there's been versions of stakeholder mapping and analysis for many, many years. And so, I think if you just Google a stakeholder map or a matrix, then there's the 4x4 or there's, the 3x3s. There's lots of different ones. And I think they're all a version of the same thing, which is essentially how important is this stakeholder to the organisation? And you determine that by how interested are they in what you do? How much impact could they have on, positively helping you to achieve your goals? Or if you don't keep them happy, is that going to take a lot of time and effort to fix that relationship? So I think it's about looking at how important are they based on a number of different factors, sort of positive and negative, and then what you need to do as an organisation to keep them, interested or happy. And I think part of it is looking then at how you communicate with the different groups. So even if you take funders, you're going to communicate and manage different funders differently, because they want to be managed differently. They have different requirements, different interests. Some of them will be like, okay, just send me a report quarterly. Some of them actually want a meeting, sit down, understand. So it's very much about not just going, oh, I've got one category of stakeholder called funders. It's actually, who are they? What do they want? How much time do they need? And it might be that you've got, like if you look at anything from people who are just interested and they want to support you, they're small donors. Well, you have to communicate with them. You have to share what you're doing and make them feel valued. But you hopefully aren't going to spend, as much time on all stakeholders. Like, you have to prioritise your own time and work out what they need. So I do like the stakeholder mapping, and I've worked with a number of organisations who are like, oh, let's plot them, which map should we use? I mean, my view is, frankly, they are all a bit of a version of the same thing, and you really pick a map that is going to work for you. And it's just about more or less sophisticated, really. Like, you've got a 3x3 or a 2x2. They're all oversimplification. Of course they are. But you need to prioritise. Like, how do you split your time? You can't be everything to everyone. And that's where I think they're useful. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of different models, and they're just versions of the same model about looking at the importance, the effort, what you do, how you communicate.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think they're good to step you through, whichever one you choose. The purpose is that it steps you through a model for all of those things, as you said, who are they? What is their level of importance to what you're trying to achieve? What are their expectations of you? The other thing is you start to see if there's any interconnections between your stakeholders as well. So are there any relationships between that you need to be aware of, positive or negative? And then how does that all translate into activity? And also then how does that translate into resourcing as well? Because to our earlier points around, there are a lot of stakeholders. It's just as simple as that. You also need to be able to know when you go through that process and what is priority and what is important. And then the strategies around how you engage with them. Are you actually resourced to be able to do that?
And that's hard. And you know what? I was actually just thinking, when you think about membership organisations, quite often they are here in Australia, federated models. And I have to say, as a national CEO, a federated model it's hard work, because if your members are, for example, the states, or if they're members from the states, then there's always a conflict, right? And I mean, I think the standard joke is if you talk to a national CEO in a federated model, it's like, which state is your recalcitrant state? Like, which state is the complete pain that every time you try and do something, they go no? Like, there's always one.
Is it the same state? Does every CEO say it's the same state, though? I have an idea about which state it could be.
No. Actually, like, some people go, oh, no, it's always X state. No, I think the point is, in my experience and with the conversations I've had, is regardless of the topic, it's the same state. It's not like, oh, for different topics, it's different states. I mean, obviously, they may have their views, but it is, disappointing, I guess, is the word, that there seems to be one state that's always hard work in a federated model. And I mean, I remember having so many conversations when I was in membership organisations where people said, look, you just would not set up a national membership association like this if you could do it now. Like, you just would not do 7 associations and then a national association on top of that. And because, it's just so much hard work. And also, it exists for historical reasons. And it's really hard to undo, in the sense that it might be that the states now have significant resources or significant patterns of donors, or like it might be that it's actually impossible to undo. And it's often a power thing as well. Like, sometimes the state is really close to the members because they might, for example, run the events and offer some support that the members really value, whereas the National Association might, for example, be doing the government relationships and the advocacy, which is the more invisible, very important, but not as directly touching the members. So it can be quite hard. And I guess my experience and my advice then is to really make sure that you have good relationships. If you're the national CEO with the state, if you're at the state level, to have really good relationships with the other states as well, because there's that whole reinventing the wheel thing you want to avoid.
Reduce duplication and...
Oh, absolutely. And just leverage. If there's a great initiative going on in one state, then it's probably going to be great in all states. Like, it'll be valuable if the members, if the members in WA really like it, then presumably the members in Queensland also like it. Like, just having those conversations, because ultimately you're there for the purpose of the members, not for politics.
I've seen over the last couple of years a lot of that federated model, the state members actually start to merge to create a national approach, sort of leveraging the power of like the single voice, the power of the collective with a single voice. And there's positives to that. I can see how, like, particularly my sector where there's peak bodies who have done that, and I can see that there's been some really great advantages, but I can also see that it also creates different kinds of gaps as well.
I think it also is driven a bit by the legislation. So if you've got national legislation, then it's hard to see the need for continuing the state bodies, depending on the sector, right? It just depends on the sector. But also the peak body themselves at the sector level might have a lot of resources and they're not going to merge. That's quite often an issue. Whereas if you've got state-based legislation or state-based funding, then, it's impossible to get rid of that because the model of funding is through the state. And so your whole reason for being is driven through state funding. So I think it is hard. Yes, there has been a real push in membership association land to try and form single entities. And so, but quite often what you end up doing is 3 or 4 states end up merging some don't. And I have to say, it's a lot of effort. Like it's a lot of meetings, a lot of documents, a lot of effort. And so, you have to test the water and see the willingness and really hopefully, if there's going to be a strong objection to it, get that out early and make a call as to whether or not you then want to spend the next 2 years of your life trying to push a merger that may or may not work. It's really hard work. But, it has to be in the best interest of the members.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately it's going to be the members who would actually agree on that or not disagree on that, isn't it? So you really do need members' voices at the table in those kinds of conversations, don't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, in that point, then we can kind of generalise that as well in the sense that you have to have ongoing conversations with all of your stakeholders to make sure you're meeting their needs, you understand their needs, and to make sure that you actually in your head have got, stakeholders, like you've got them in the right groups in the sense that it's not just one mass of funders or members, or you actually can break it down and understand their needs. There's no better way of doing it than talking with them and understanding their needs. And, it doesn't have to be you as the CEO, like you should for the key stakeholders, but your team also needs to speak with the stakeholders and broaden those relationships. I think that's really important.
The other side of that too is that your board need to be across it too, don't they? Because they're also making decisions that have direct implications on stakeholders. Now, if a member-based organisation, there's likely to be members on the board. For other types of organisations, you might have consumer reps on the board, or you might have a completely independent board from the service delivery. So as part of your stakeholder planning and your stakeholder mapping is actually including the board in that whole process. So they are actually part of it. I know in part of my role, when I've done that piece of work, I've then actually done a stakeholder engagement plan for the board. So I've gone to them and said, you're part of this process too, to bring them into the stakeholders, not from an operational perspective, to help to understand so they feel informed when they're making decisions. They know what they're making decisions about and who it impacts as well. That has been hugely valuable.
Well, I think that depending on your board, they may have great relationships with some of your key stakeholders. And so I think there's that clarification piece around who is involved in this relationship, because you want to avoid this left hand, right hand, not knowing what each other's doing. And so who is going to help? And it might be that a board member will go to 1 or 2 meetings, help set up a relationship with an executive or the CEO and help that relationship. Or it might be that, as you say, if it's a member organisation and they've got members on the board, which is standard, they actually may be best placed to manage that relationship with communication as to who's doing what. But if they've got the relationship, why would you not continue to use that? And, that's part of their reason for being on the board, is to help the organisation. And, they will leverage their relationships to do that. So, yeah, very much I think about setting up clear communication and engagement plans and knowing who is from your side, who's doing what, because that's, something that the CEO really needs to get across and manage.
Very quickly, like if you're very new in the role, that should certainly be sitting within that first month, not building out the plan, but first obviously building out who. Michelle, how often would you suggest that you evaluate the effectiveness of your stakeholder engagement, and also how often, would you suggest you actually do the mapping as well? Because the mapping's not a, set and forget type of process.
No, it's probably more like an annual cycle, because it's going to depend different stakeholders. So say you've got your funders in there, you're going to report regularly at different intervals. If it's your members, then I'd probably try and set up different communications with different parts of the membership, but based around, for example, whether it's your annual conference or an event, or, again, it's one of these things people say, do a survey. People hate surveys. You might as well just pick up the phone, have a conversation. You're more likely to get better feedback. If you've got nothing, then a survey. But again, I just think people hate doing surveys on this kind of thing. And you really want some concrete suggestions if there's a problem as well.
Yeah, deducting it down, reducing it to numerical data of like how would you score something between 1 and 5 often become a little bit meaningless. Like you don't know then what that means. And you're right, people survey fatigue. So that could be more through direct conversation, reaching out, having coffees, at events, doing the networking, that sort of thing.
And that's kind of the fun part too, right? Building the relationship, keeping that going. I think in my experience, people like to give feedback. It's just that it has to be sought in the right way, in a way that makes them feel comfortable and safe.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a strong recommendation, I think, away from surveys is
yes, not another survey.
We get them all. We all know. We all get them. So why do we ask people to do them?
Exactly. All right. So I think, have we missed anything?
No, I think I was going to say there's so much to say about stakeholders. We could probably break this into another episode and talk about some of the other stakeholders that sit within it. But I think first and foremost, what we're saying is do the mapping, list out your stakeholders, do the map, understand their level of importance and priority, and understand your level of importance and priority to them.
Yeah, very much so.
And then work through how to engage and evaluate.
100%.
Excellent. Thank you.
Done. Talk later.